You know the names, right? Little Red Riding Hood, Snow White, Hansel and Gretel. They're the stories we all grew up with. We know the characters, we know the endings, or at least we think we do. But what if I told you the versions you remember are just one piece of a much older, darker, and way more interesting puzzle? I mean, just look at this scene. You know it instantly, don't you? The innocent girl, the basket of treats, the wolf who's a little too friendly. This whole image is basically burned into our brains. But here's the thing. The story behind this picture has twisted and turned over the centuries. And why it was first told, well, that might just surprise you. All right, so before we get into all the surprising stuff, let's just hit rewind and do a quick refresher on the tale as we know it. It all kicks off with our hero, Little Red Riding Hood, heading through the woods to visit her sick grandmother when she has a very bad run-in with a very big wolf. So the wolf, being pretty crafty, tells her she should stop and pick some flowers. While she's distracted, he sprints ahead to Grandma's house, gobbles her up, and then hops into bed to wait. And this is where you get those famous lines. "Granny, what big ears you have. All the better to hear you with." You know how it goes. All leading up to that terrifying climax. And hey, it's not just Little Red's story. Think about another one of the greats, Snow White. You've got a beautiful princess, an evil stepmother who is totally obsessed with her magic mirror, and the moment that mirror says Snow White is now the fairest of them all, well, the queen flips out, and the princess has to flee for her life into those same deep, dark woods. And this is where we really start digging in, because these stories feel so permanent, don't they? Like they've been around forever, just as they are. But they didn't just appear out of nowhere. Their history is way more complicated, and honestly, the versions we love today are often the cleaned-up, sanitized remixes. To really get to the bottom of this, we need to look past the picture books and understand what these stories are at their core. They aren't just children's stories, they're folk tales. So what even is a folktale? Well, it's a story born from people just talking. Think about that for a second. Before anyone ever wrote these down, they were just told, out loud, probably around a fire. Parents telling their kids, grandparents telling their grandkids, and changing just a little bit with every single telling. And that has some huge implications. Because they were passed down by word of mouth, we have no idea who originally wrote them. The authors are just gone, lost to time. It wasn't one single creator. It was thousands of storytellers from different places, each adding their own little spin. So the fact that there are different versions of these stories isn't a mistake. It's the whole point. Let's see exactly how this works with a perfect example, our friend Little Red Riding Hood. Because the ending you're probably thinking of, yeah, that is not the original one, not by a long shot. This shows you just how much a story can change. In one of the very first written versions from way back in 1697, the wolf eats Little Red Riding Hood, and that's it. The end. Seriously. It was a brutal, straightforward warning for a time when dangers were very, very real. So that heroic woodcutter who shows up and saves the day, he was added much, much later, probably by the Brothers Grimm, to give the story a happier, more kid-friendly ending. Now, besides the plot, there's another huge piece of this puzzle we need to talk about, the setting. Little Red Riding Hood, Snow White, Hansel and Gretel. Where do they all get into trouble? Yep, the forest. The forest in these stories is never just a bunch of trees. It's practically a character all on its own. It's this place where the normal rules of the world just don't apply, and it represents both amazing fantasy and very real fear. You see, the forest has these two faces. On the one hand, it's this enchanted world where anything is possible. You've got talking animals, you've got helpful dwarves, you've even got houses made of candy. But on the other hand, for people centuries ago, it represented a very real danger. Forests were these huge, dark places where you could get lost, or worse, run into bandits or wild animals. And that gets right to the heart of their original purpose. These stories had a job to do. They weren't just entertainment. They were basically survival guides wrapped in a fantasy story. A really memorable way for adults to warn kids about the real dangers of wandering off the path. Don't talk to strangers, or else. So, this brings us to the really big question. With all the grim endings and practical warnings, why have these stories stuck around for hundreds, maybe even thousands of years? Why are we still obsessed with them? Well, it really boils down to a perfect recipe. First, they are incredibly adaptable. As we saw, you can just tack on a new ending to fit the times. Second, they tap into these deep, universal human feelings, things like fear, courage, and jealousy. And finally, they're an open door. They invite us into a world of fantasy and imagination where anything can happen. So, the next time you hear one of these classic tales, maybe think a little bit beyond the happily ever after. Ask yourself, what's the real-world warning hiding under all the magic? And in a world that has changed so much, what timeless truths about fear and courage, and just being careful, are these ancient stories still trying to teach us?